Good evening. There's been some questions about the HTML review exercise, and I just wanted to jump in and give you some quick tips. Most of you have already submitted it. What I'm hoping for is that you'll just use some basic HTML and CSS, and at a minimum, some CSS floats, whether uh, you use fixed width, multiple columns with fixed width or percentages, so you get kind of a liquid layout. I'm not looking for you to use Flexbox or Bootstrap, but you can do that if you want. But what I'm most interested in with this exercise is that I can see that you're okay with your HTML, working with things like images and wrapping text and headlines, working with identifiers and classes, and that you're good with that, because then when we move forward in the coming weeks with JavaScript, we're going to spend a lot of time getting and setting different identifiers and elements and with specific classes. For example, we're going to get elements with document.getElement by ID, and we might set the inner HTML of that element with JavaScript. And so this is just the basics. I'm not looking for anything fancy. For those of you that are still kind of working on it and struggling, I just wanted to give you some tips. Now here's just a rudimentary layout of the website for Friendly Paws. Like I say, this is the home page. I don't have all the elements in there, but I do have the photo of her with the dog. And you can see that as I scale the page, this is kind of a flexible layout because I'm using percentages. And you know that because when I scale it, everything within each of the divisions sort of flows on down with the document, and each of the divs just gets a little bit taller as necessary, and then at a certain point it just ain't gonna go anymore. It just can't fit it. So let's keep it simple. um, Here's the HTML, and pretty straightforward when we look at the document and the markup. As we get down here and we look at the body, I'm using Sublime Text now. You can use just about um, any editor that you want. I don't have a problem with it. But as you can see, what I have here is I've got a container, which is the main container, and within that container I have the header. This is a semantic tag, and then the nav tag. Within the nav I have an unordered list, and I'm using CSS so that that list might look at it like a rudimentary nav bar. And then I have another div with the main content in it, right? And but that image, as well as a div which is kind of a rudimentary nav bar. And then when we look at the CSS, then we can see how everything flows. Now, as I was saying, since I'm using percentages, you can see here that the main container, I've set the margin left and right to 10%, and that's why when we looked at it in the beginning, that you could see that you've got this space over here, right? And so that margin is always protected there for the main content, that main container, that div. And then down here we have the header, just add a little background color, the nav, and what I'm using is CSS float, so you can see I'm floating it left, and I set the width to 20%. And then it's an unordered list, and I don't want any decorations, so the list style. Basically, I want to stylize the list items so there's none, so I get rid of the donuts, right, and the bulleted list. And then within the main content, um, div, and you can see in the CSS, this is the kind of thing I'll be looking for, is that you are very liberal about commenting your CSS and commenting your code. So here I have the main content container, and I've set the width to 80%, and I'm floating it left. And here I've got that small nav, and I'm clearing both the main content div as well as um, the nav. And so as you can see, so if I wanted to change these so that instead of using percentages, I use a fixed width, then I can just comment out these percentages where I set the width to percentage, and then just change the width to a fixed width in pixels. But you got to do the math, so everything has to add up, right? So as I comment out this width, okay, and I get and turn on and set the width in pixels, you can see that 780, right? 780 plus 120 is 900. So the width of the container I'm going to set to 900. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out these margins in percentage, right? And so I'll go ahead and comment that out. And so if I go back and I reload the page and move it in and out, we can see we've got fixed width. So if hopefully that gets you started. If you have any questions, we're wrapping up. Pretty much should have wrapped up this week. Again, these are just tips. If you have any questions, post them to the questions forum.